Hello, readers by eyes and by ears. This is Mari Chen, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are doing the continuation of Thousand Autumns, Volume 1, also known as Qian Qiu by Meng Xi Shi. We are going to be reading chapters 4, 5, and 6. I hope you enjoy. Chapter 4, Getting to Know the Beauty. Yu Shengyan didn't explain the purpose of their trip to Shenqiao when they first set out. Funing County wasn't too far from Yecheng, the capital of Qi. At Yu Shengyan's normal speed, he could get there in 3 to 5 days. But out of consideration for Shen Qiao's health, he set a slower pace, and they took 7 days to arrive in Yecheng. Shen Qiao's current condition was still unsuited for long trips, though, even one taken at such a leisurely pace. Right after they arrived in Yecheng, he fell ill with a low fever. Huanyue's sect didn't have many disciples, but they didn't lack for money. The sect owned a house in Yecheng, which is where Yu Shengyan and Shen Qiao stayed. Yan Wushi was the owner of the house, so when the servants saw Yu Shengyan and Shen Qiao, they addressed them as young masters and made fitting arrangements for them with utmost care. Shen Qiao spoke little during their travels. He'd walk, stop when Yu Shengyan told him to, and never mentioned his illness. Yu Shengyan had to discover it for himself. When he'd asked, Shen Qiao just smiled and said, "I know that this trip is to complete an errand Shutsun assigned. I'm already very ashamed that my injuries prevent me from helping. How could I burden Shuxiong with even more trouble?" His complexion was pale and clammy, yet he still wore a gentle smile when he spoke. It made him look pitiful, yet charming. After all, Yu Shengyan was not yet Yan Wushi. A bit of compassion welled up inside him, a rare occurrence. "You may be ill, but it's no trouble to tell me about it. I'm not an unreasonable person. We do still have to complete Shitsun's errand, though. I've already made inquiries. Yan Zhiwen is a Hehuan sect member, but as a martial artist, he's just second rate. Plus, his wives and children know nothing of martial arts. Their household has taken no precautions, so I'll have no trouble killing him on my own. But Shitsun has requested the death of his entire family, too. When the time comes, I'll bring you there with me. Once I've killed Yan Zhiwen, I'll grab a woman or a child for you to take care of." This was the first time that Shen Qiao heard what the task Yan Wushi had given them entailed. Surprise colored his face. "May I ask Shishong about the history of Hehuan sect? What grudge do we have with Yan Zhiwen?" Yu Shengyan remembered that Shen Qiao still knew nothing, so he explained. "Our Huanyue sect, Hehuan sect, and Fajing sect all originate from Fenglin Province's Ruyue sect. When the Ruyue sect fell apart, it split into these 3 branches. Usually, since we all come from the same source, we'd be united against outsiders. But everyone wants to be the one who unifies the noble discipline, especially Hehuan sect. Their sect leader is called Yuan Xiuxiu, and the disciples there are all just like her. They've always preferred to wield their beauty to satisfy their ambitions. But they're not weak in martial arts either, so you should probably steer clear of them. This Yuan Xiuxiu has a lover named Sang Jingxing, who was once Cui Youwang's disciple. Those 2 vermin work hand in glove together, carrying out their evil schemes day in and day out. While Shitsun was in seclusion, they even tried time and time again to annex our Huanyue sect." Shen Qiao nodded. "But since Yan Zhiwen is only second rate within their sect, and he has the status of a Qi official, I imagine that he himself has never made trouble for Huanyue sect. So why must Shitsun go after him?" Yu Shengyan curled his lips. "Shirdi, this injury of yours has turned you soft and naive. Practically a bunny rabbit. Yan Zhiwen is a special case. He's used his identity as a Qi official as a cover, so only a few people know that he's from Hehuan sect. If we kill him, first, it sends a warning to our enemies, and frightens them. And second, Hu Huan sect will understand that we know everything about them. They won't dare make any more brazen moves after that. Third, since they made trouble for us while Shitsun was gone, we have to return the favor now that Shitsun is back, right? Otherwise, won't everyone think that Huan Yue sect is some kind of pushover? The year Cui Yo Wang died, Huan Yue sect was the strongest of Ru Yue sect's three branches, and we had the most hope of reunifying the noble discipline. It was only because Shitsun got injured and was forced to retreat into seclusion that Hu Huan sect even had an opportunity at all. Then what about Fa Jing sect? Have they never made trouble for us? Asked Shen Qiao. Honestly, out of the three sects, only He Huan relies on strength in numbers. Fa Jing sect is the same as Huan Yue sect. Disciples scattered over many locations, each acting on their own. They don't usually gather together. After Shi Tzuan left seclusion, he only contacted me alone, and that's why I rushed over. As for you, he coughed delicately. Naturally, you're with us because you were injured. So, in short, the three sects don't get along with each other, but only He Huan's sect keeps making trouble and is the most flagrant about it. Shun Qiao sighed. Grudges have a source and debts a debtor. Since He Huan's sect is led by Yuan Xiuxiu, why does Shi Tzuan not take it up with her directly? Even if you take it up with Yan Zhiwen, his wives and children have no ties to the Jianghu, so why involve them? Yu Shengyan fiddled with a tassel hanging in front of the bed, unconcerned. Shi Tzuan has given us orders, so all we need to do is follow them. Why ask so many questions? Grass must be pulled up from the roots, or else the spring wind will revive it anew. If we don't kill Yan Zhiwen's wives and children, should we just wait for them to seek revenge someday? After saying this, he stood up. Anyway, the matter isn't urgent. We've still got a couple of days until the 7th. For the next 2 days, you should rest properly. Once you're well, I'll ask someone to show you around Yecheng. In my opinion, in terms of world capitals, Yecheng is as luxurious as Jiankang and quite a bit grander. It's worth strolling around, especially the pleasure district. Yu Shengyan was only in his early 20s, but he was a real romantic. In southern Chen, he'd concealed his identity and discussed poetry and verses, befriending famous scholars and making a decent reputation for himself. At the moment, he was in high spirits and was about to go on chatting, but then he considered Shun Qiao's condition. Even if the mood struck, the man wouldn't have the strength to perform. So, Yu Shengyan held his tongue and gave Shun Qiao a meaningful smile instead. It's no matter, you have amnesia at the moment, and you can't recall the past. Just so you know, our Huan Yue sect is full of free-spirited, romantic people who do as they please. You can take it slow. You'll have plenty of opportunities to experience everything in the future. When Yan Wushi traveled, he used the identity of a wealthy merchant with the last name Xie. So, the plaque on his house read Xie Residence. Yu Shengyan was often absent, leaving Shen Qiao behind alone. Everyone at the residence couldn't help but sympathize with Shen Qiao, since he treated them all with kindness and because he was so sickly and frail. The maids who served beside him were especially sympathetic. A few days after the two of them arrived, the maids had already grown much closer to Shen Qiao and even tried to relieve his boredom by telling him about the scenery and people around the Qi capital and Xie residence. Once he was feeling better, and since he had nothing to do, Shen Qiao asked them to take him outside on a couple of excursions. On these, he discovered that Yecheng was indeed as Yu Shengyan had described. White jade lined the street. The roofs were trimmed with tiles of carved glaze. Qi's Gao clan were Xianbei acculturated Han by descent, So their buildings and architecture, their clothes and customs, all retained some traditional Xianbei influences. Compared to the refined elegance of the South, here there was a sense of unrestrained vigor. The exact same kind of wine, when sold in Yecheng's liquor stores, tasted stronger and richer than it did in Jiankang. Wide robes and loose sleeves, fluttering lapels and dancing sashes, exquisite horses and extravagant carriages. Even if Shenqiao couldn't see, he could feel the capital's glory and prosperity in the fragrance and atmosphere of Yecheng's street alleys. With the maid's assistance, he entered the pharmacy and sat down in the side hall to rest while the maid went to fill the prescription. He had practically become a medicine pot himself. Every day he had to imbibe at least one giant bowl of medicinal soup. Although Yan Wushi wasn't about to do the charitable thing and help restore his martial arts, he also hadn't abandoned Shen Qiao to linger on, half dead. The medicine he was drinking now was mainly for regulating his qi, blood, and meridians, as well as strengthening his bones and bolstering his yang energy. At the moment, Shen Qiao's internal energy was completely gone, hollowed out. With his memories missing as well, it was pointless to expect his martial arts to return anytime soon. The fact that he could now walk unhindered and move freely, though, was all thanks to these few months of rest and recuperation. When the maid had to come out today to get medicine, he'd followed along to catch some fresh air. He could scarcely imagine that, despite his blindness and sickly appearance, he still drew quite a lot of attention while he sat there in the pharmacy. Shen Qiao had always had a handsome face. Though it was thinner now, his looks and grace remained intact. He was dressed in a plain bamboo green robe. His hair held no crown and was left in place with a plain wooden pin. He sat and did nothing, quiet and unspeaking, the corners of his mouth drawn up in a subtle smile as he listened to the maid speak with the pharmacy shopkeeper. It seemed Yan Wushi wasn't worried about Shen Qiao being recognized while out and about. He'd allowed him to appear in public and hadn't instructed Yu Shengyan to conceal his appearance at all. He had no reason to worry, since Shen Qiao rarely came down the mountain to appear in public. Not before he'd become the sect leader, nor after. It was said that even Xuandu Mountain's disciples might not recognize their new sect leader. There had been a few Xuandu Mountain disciples who were famous outside of the sect, but in the end, none of them were selected to lead. Instead, it'd been the relatively unknown Shen Qiao. Probably only Tifengge himself knew the reasons why, and he was gone. What was more, on the day Kunye dueled Shen Qiao, only the two of them stood at the summit of Banbu Peak. Space was limited, so those who came to watch the fight were all on the Yinghui Peak opposite them. There was some distance in between, so onlookers might not have been able to recall Shen Qiao's appearance in detail. And, after his bout of serious illness, Shen Qiao's appearance and energy was greatly reduced. But all this was just speculation on Yu Shengyan's part. Knowing his Shitsuan's nature, Yu Shengyan privately guessed that Shen Qiao was probably nothing but a whim to Shitsuan, something for him to manipulate and toy with. "Sir, I have the medicine now. Shall we go?" Shen Qiao nodded, and the maid helped him up. The two of them had just made it to the pharmacy entrance when they heard someone say, "This gentleman is so charming and elegant, yet I have never seen him before. May I ask you for your esteemed name?" The owner of the voice did not hide their astonishment. When the maid's steps paused, Shen Qiao knew that they were talking about him. "This humble one is Shen Qiao," he said. "So, it's Shen Longjun." The woman's voice was clear and pleasant, vivacious and bubbly. "Is Shen Longjun from the capital, or perhaps which noble family is he from?" The maid leaned in, whispering into Shen Qiao's ear, "This is Chief Steward Han's daughter, Han Ying. Chief Steward Han was Han Feng. He wasn't just the chief steward for someone's house. He was the palace attendant of Qi. He was a prominent man in Qi. His son had married a princess, and he himself was known as one of the three nobles of Qi, along with Mu Tipo and Gao Anagong. His authority eclipsed the imperial court and common people alike. As the Han family's daughter, Han Ying could have anything she wished. Shun Qiao said with a smile, "This Shun has long heard of Han Yangzi's renowned name, but he is currently suffering from a disease of the eyes, so he cannot see Han Yangzi's beauty. He hopes you will forgive him. When this Shun recovers from his illness one day, he will come again to visit." Han Ying had noticed his spiritless gaze. She couldn't help pitying him a bit, mourning how such a beautiful gentleman just had to be blind. Her interest waning, she said, "That's fine then. You should go take care of yourself. Xiaolian, go tell the shopkeeper to bring some ginseng over. Let Shen Langjun take it with him. I'll pay for it." "Thank you, Han Yangzi," said Shen Qiao. "This Shen has something for you as well. Although it isn't much of a gift, please kindly accept it." Han Ying perked back up. "Oh, what is it?" "Miao," said Shen Qiao, "bring that box from the carriage over here." The maid gave an answer, then hurried to bring over the box Shen Qiao mentioned. Shen Qiao couldn't see, but his words were gentle, and his manner of speech was lovely, with a quality that soothed the listener. Even Han Ming, an arrogant and willful rich lady who stopped beautiful men on the street just to flirt with them, couldn't help but soften her tone with him. The maid returned with the box just as Shen Qiao and Han Ying finished their brief exchange and said farewell. Han Ying had asked for Shen Qiao's address and even said that she'd come to visit some other day. Finally, she mounted her horse and took her leave. When he returned to the Xie residence, Yu Shengyan heard about the encounter and had to click his tongue in amazement. "You've got a real knack. You acquainted yourself with Han Ying after just one trip outside? That girl is the Shizhi of Zhao Chiying from Mount Tai's Bixia sect. Her martial arts are nothing special, but because of her father's status, she throws her weight around in the city." Shun Qiao smiled. "In my opinion, she's not too bad. She didn't particularly throw her weight around." Yu Shengyan laughed. "She's a real beauty, but unfortunately, her personality is unbearable. Everyone in the capital agrees. You're the only one who says she isn't bad." Shun Qiao smiled, but didn't reply. Chapter 5. Separate Ways. It was about 3 days after this little episode, and the day that Yu Shengyan was scheduled to make his move. The new year had just come, and the Lantern Festival had yet to arrive, so Yecheng was bursting with a joyful atmosphere. Yan Zhiwen wasn't a very high-ranking official. He Huan's sect probably only positioned him there to give themselves more eyes and ears inside the court. He wasn't skilled in martial arts, and he'd taken no precautions for his safety. Even though Yu Shengyan was just a disciple, Yan Zhiwen would probably give him about as much trouble as a cool drink of water. However, since Yan Wushi had instructed him to do so, Yu Shengyan still brought Shen Qiao along with him. While Shen Qiao waited outside the Yan residence, Yu Shengyan leapt straight onto the roof, then soundlessly groped his way toward Yan Zhiwen's study. According to his information, Yan Zhiwen was quite cunning, despite being a second-rate martial artist. That was why he'd been able to land a place in He Huan sect. Yu Shengyan was only killing him to frighten their enemies, though, so he hadn't really given the man himself much thought. Only when he entered did he realize that something was wrong. The Yan residence's servants were still there. The guards still patrolled the perimeter from time to time. But although he searched from the study to the bedroom, Yu Shengyan failed to find any trace of Yan Zhiwen himself. And it wasn't only Yan Zhiwen. It seemed that even his wives, concubines, and children had all disappeared into thin air. Wraith like and wrapped in shadows, Yu Shengyan's movements took after the style of Huanyue sect, unpredictable and cunning. He alighted inside the inner house, then grabbed a servant and tapped an acupoint near his throat, rendering him mute. Feeling like he'd fallen into a surreal dream, the man was unable to react in time. Where is Yan Zhiwen? The servant's eyes widened when he realized how effortlessly this handsome young man could restrain him. He was seized with panic, but couldn't speak. Yu Shengyan smiled thinly at him. You tell me where Yan Zhiwen and his family have gone, and I won't kill you. Otherwise, even if you call for help, I can kill everyone in this house until not a soul is left. Do you understand? The servant was beyond terrified. He nodded convulsively. Yu Shengyan loosened his grip a little and undid the acupoint. Quickly, the servant said, The mistresses and the young masters left 2 days ago. The master said he'd sent them to stay for a while at his spare villa by the springs. Yu Shengyan sneered. Even if the women are gone, don't tell me Yan Zhiyan left with them. He still has court tomorrow. Does he not intend to return? The servant said, This master didn't tell us much when he left, so we don't know. He ran out of patience for listening to this stammering and knocked the man unconscious with a palm strike. Then he found the Yan's residence chief steward and pressed him about the Yan family's whereabouts, but he received the exact same answer. Yu Shengyan wasn't stupid. By this point, he'd realized that Yan Zhiwen had probably been warned that someone was coming to kill him. But Yan Wushi himself had ordered the assassination. Apart from him, only Shen Qiao knew about it. Even the Xie residence's chief steward had no idea. Yu Shengyan certainly couldn't have gone around yelling about the plan and leaking the news himself. Icy killing intent surged through his heart. At first, he wanted to crush the chief steward's throat right there, but then he gave it a second thought. Now that he couldn't kill the entire Yan family, killing one subordinate was meaningless. It might even put the enemy on higher alert and draw He Huan sect's ridicule. Thus, he knocked the man unconscious, then turned and left the residence. Steaming with anger, he went and found Shen Qiao, who was still waiting for him in a nearby alley. Did you tip off Yan Zhiwen? Shen Qiao nodded, showing not the slightest hesitation or denial. Indeed. Enraged at how he'd ruined things, Yu Shengyan's usual careless smile was nowhere to be seen. Instead, his expression was cold and murderous. Why? I know that there is a rift between our sect and He Huan sect. Yan Zhiwen is a member of He Huan sect, so Shi Tsun wishes to kill him. It's not my place to comment on that. But are the children guilty? If he wants to kill Yan Zhiwen, why bring his spouses and children into it? Coldly, Yu Shengyan said, It's not your place to say whether his spouses and children should die. But what I really wish to know is how exactly you managed to deliver the message to Yan Zhiwen. You're blind, feeble, and can't even tell north from south. You've said before that Yan Zhiwen is a cunning man, said Shen Qiao. If there's a single detail out of place, it will arouse his suspicions. My prescription contained a portion of Danmei. I managed to hide some of it and was looking for a chance to send it to the Yan residence. But then I happened to meet Han Ying outside the pharmacy that day. Using the excuse of a return gift, I put what I'd intended to give Yan Zhiwen inside a box and requested she pass it on to him. She assumed we were acquainted and asked no further questions. I imagined that when Yan Zhiwen received the Danmei, he must have sensed that something was wrong. So he moved his family in advance. Yu Shengyan was so angry he could only laugh. I truly underestimated you. I never anticipated you to be so capable. He reached out and squeezed Shen Qiao's neck, slowly choking him. Do you know the consequences of ruining a mission assigned by Shitsun? Shen Xiao had no strength to fight back. He couldn't breathe, and his complexion grew ugly, his chest heaving rapidly. He managed to spit out a broken, stilted sentence. The truth is, I'm not a Huan Yue sect disciple, am I? Yu Shenyan froze, and his hand went slack. Shen Qiao immediately grabbed onto the wall for support, coughing. How did you figure it out? A feeling, Shen Qiao said calmly. Although I have no memories, my judgment is still intact. Whether it's Shishun or Shishong, neither of you treated me like their disciple or martial sibling. The servants who served me at the first villa were very cautious with me too, as if they were afraid of revealing something they shouldn't. I have no martial ability, and I'm completely unable to help on this mission. Even though I'd only drag you down, Shitsun still wanted me to come along. Not to mention that even if it was due to my own incompetence, me being injured this badly should have damaged my master's reputation. Yet, you never mentioned anything about that. None of it made any sense. Seeing Yu Shenyan made no move to reply, he continued. In truth, the method I used wasn't all that clever. It could only fool the Xie residence maids. If you hadn't considered Yan Zhiwen beneath you, and if you'd sent someone to keep an eye on him, he wouldn't have been able to escape even if he tried. That's right. Yan Zhiwen is insignificant, so I didn't take him seriously. That's why you had the opportunity to step in and take advantage. But do you know the consequences if Shitsuan learns of this? You save some people who have nothing to do with you, and they won't even know you helped them escape. If they did know, they might not even be grateful. Was it worth it? Shen Qiao shook his head. When it comes to worth, every heart weighs it differently. Grudges have a source and debts a debtor, but involving innocent people should never be commended. When you don't save people, you could have. When you don't take action when you could have, a shadow lodges in your heart forever. Whether other people know about it, whether they feel grateful, that's their business. Yu Shenyan had never seen Shen Qiao as he'd been before his fall, and didn't know what he'd been like before his injuries. From the moment Shen Qiao had woken up, he'd been feeble and sickly and spent 9 out of 10 days in bed. Other than his good looks, there was nothing remarkable about him. Although Yu Shenyan had never made any vicious comments, deep down, he'd also looked down on Shen Qiao, thinking that only someone hopelessly incompetent could fall from a perfectly fine sect leader into such a dreadful state. But at this moment, as he leaned against the wall, Shen Qiao's face was as tranquil as a clear day, devoid of fear or panic. There, faintly visible, was the aura of someone who'd once been a grand master of his generation. Yu Shunyan sneered. You can't even take care of yourself, but you've got the time to care if other people live or die? If you're so chock full of kindness, why not think about the day you lost all your martial arts and were left at the bottom of a cliff? We were the ones who saved you. If not for us, you would be a corpse in the wilderness by now. And this is how you repay us? Shen Qiao sighed. The kindness of saving a life should be repaid in abundance, but the two situations are unrelated. Yu Shenyan frowned. He'd thought that this would be a simple assignment, but he couldn't have guessed that Shen Qiao, amnesiac that he was, would act so unexpectedly. He'd even managed to pass information to Yan Zhiwen right beneath Yu Shenyan's nose. When this news got back to Shitsuan, he would definitely be deemed incompetent, unable to handle a minor task such as this. Shen Qiao was special, so Yu Shenyan couldn't kill him. He'd probably just have to bring him back for Shitsuan to deal with. Shen Qiao seemed to sense his mood and actually tried to reassure him. Don't worry, I will explain what happened to the sect leader. You won't be implicated. Yu Shenyan was sulky. You're the one who should be worried. Shen Qiao smiled. Abruptly, he asked, Yu Shishong, since I'm not a member of Huan Yue's sect, may I ask if Shen Qiao is my real name? Yu Shenyan was silent for a moment. It's real. Then who was I before I was injured? Do I have any family who are still alive? When you get back, you should ask Shutsun yourself. But they didn't go see Yan Wushi when they returned. Shortly after they departed for Yecheng, Yan Wushi had also left the villa. They were told he was headed to Zhou. Then, before Shutsun left, did he leave behind any instructions? Yu Shengyan asked the villa steward. The master wants you to head to Banbu Peak for your training, said the steward. As for Shen Gongzi, the master said that if everything went well, then he should remain in the villa to recuperate. But if Shen Gongzi disrupted your plans in Yecheng and gave you trouble, then he must leave here by himself and is forbidden from taking anything with him. Yu Shengyan was a bit taken aback. Did Shutsun really say that? The steward gave him a strained smile. Where would this lowly one find the gall to lie? Yu Shengyan had just been worrying about how he was going to explain himself upon their return. Who could have expected such a flippant conclusion? He pondered for a moment, then called for Shen Qiao and told him about the message Yan Wushi had left for them. Shen Qiao took it quite calmly. After all, I did give you trouble, and I prevented you from completing the task the sect leader gave you. It's incredibly lenient of him to handle things this way. Yu Shengyan understood a thing or two about his master. The way he saw it, Yan Wushi was definitely not being lenient. He probably had some other calculations going on. Shen Qiao was blind, and the world was in chaos. Anything could happen to him out there. If he got abducted, and then people found out that the imposing sect leader of Xuandu Mountain had been reduced to an abductee, Xuandu Mountain's dignity would be in tatters. They wouldn't even have the face to remain in the Jianghu. Yu Shengyan might not have been as capricious and unrestrained as his master, but he still wasn't about to go against his master's wishes for Shen Qiao's sake. In that case, you should leave tomorrow. Northeast from here is Yecheng, and southeast is southern Chen. If you wish to go to Jiankang, you should head southeast, but the journey will be longer. You've already been to Yecheng. It's prosperous but chaotic, and the road there will also be full of vagrants. If you wish to live a peaceful life, going to southern Chen is better. Shen Qiao nodded and clasped his hands in thanks. Thank you for telling me, Yu Xiong. I have one request. I wish for Yu Xiong to tell me who I am and where I'm from. That way, I'll have somewhere to go. Yu Shengyan was indifferent. All things considered, there's no harm in telling you now. You used to be the sect leader of Xuandu's Violet Palace on Xuandu Mountain. During a fight with the Gokturk's #1 martial artist, Kunye, you fell from the mountain cliff. Shutsun rescued you. However, I'd advise against rushing back there to look for kin. I haven't heard a word about anyone from Xuandu Mountain searching for you since the incident. Xuandu Mountain. Shen Xiao frowned, then muttered the name again, and a bewildered expression came over his face. Yu Shengyan sneered. Our Huan Yue sect may be demonic in the eyes of the world, but at least we're open and honest villains. We kill when we say we will kill, and we're never afraid to speak our minds. Unlike certain righteous sects who say one thing and do the opposite. Of course, it's up to you whether you take my word for it. If you end up dead, don't say I didn't warn you beforehand. Shen Qiao was silent. Early the next morning, the villa's servants woke him up and politely dismissed him from the building. He had nothing to call his own except a green bamboo cane. Forget copper coins, he didn't even have a handful of food. Yu Shengyan was blatantly giving him zero leeway, just as he'd intended. Shen Qiao was left to fend for himself. The dawn sun shone warmly down upon him, bringing with it the scent of spring. It wasn't unpleasant at all. Shun Qiao squinted a bit and raised the hand to shield his eyes. After gradual progress, he was now able to perceive light, though it only came through in blurred shapes, and his eyes stung and wept after looking too long. It was still better than opening his eyes to see nothing but darkness. He turned back to look at the villa. Though Huan Yue's sect never had good intentions, it was undeniable that they'd taken him in and given him medical treatment and care. This was a favor that couldn't be erased. If Shen Qiao met Yan Wushi in person one day, then he'd have to thank him. Chapter 6 Chen Gong. More than 200 years had passed since the people of Jin had migrated south, and the north was finally finding some stability after weathering the uprising of the 5 barbarians. The kingdoms of Qi and Zhou were separated by a border. One lay to the east and the other to the west. The emperor of Qi, Gao Wei, was erratic and outlandish in his actions, and it was his negligence that had brought about northern Qi's decline and the spread of vagrants and refugees. Meanwhile, under Emperor Yu Wenyong's rule, northern Zhou flourished more with every passing day. Within its borders, life was stable and the people were prosperous. It was a fair distance between Funing County and Zhou, and many refugees also traveled along those roads. If one started on the journey with little preparation, they would soon truly understand what it was like for both heaven and earth to ignore their pleas. A drought had taken hold in northern Qi the year before. Even when winter came, there'd been very little snow, and so the famine continued into the current year, and refugees could be seen walking the entire distance from Yecheng to the Chen border. Rumor was that in some places, starving people had even begun eating each other's children. Shun Xiao considered his poor eyesight and inability to fight. If he somehow found himself in company of cannibals, he'd almost certainly end up on the dinner menu. Funing County was closer to Yecheng in the north, and although they'd had little rain there either, they hadn't suffered any great disaster, so the area was comparatively more stable. The county was also large, and since the temple festival had begun, the town was lively and bustling as many people came and went. Qi and Zhou were northern countries, and during the North's early years, Xianbei customs had prevailed. But as time went on, Han influence gradually took hold, and now even their clothes and jewelry mostly embodied Han refinement with a Xianbei touch. The upper-class nobles pursued elegance and splendor, wearing long trailing ribbons and tinkling beads of jade. Their aspirations shaped the trends for all folk. So every rich family without exception wore full-length gowns, and there were also hats and flowing skirts in the northern fashions. With such a myriad of styles, the scenery in this Funing County town transformed it into a little capital during the temple festival. The temple festival was being held at the newer Duke Jiang's temple, where, of course, the one they worshipped was the Grand Duke Jiang, Jiangshang. The original Duke Jiang's temple was located on the south side of town. It was said to have been built during the Han Dynasty, but later damaged by war and then abandoned completely. Now only a dilapidated shell was left, and even the statue of Duke Jiang had gone missing. And so, the empty ramshackle temple became a shelter for beggars and paupers. Recently, a new resident had moved in, and he was named Chen Gong. During the day, he worked at the town's granary as a seasonal laborer, loading and unloading rice from carts, doing only heavy work. As his pay was meager, he couldn't bear to spend it on rent, so when night fell, he returned to the broken-down temple. He was quite content with this arrangement, but there were 2 beggars living at the temple too, so he couldn't make it his permanent residence. He had to keep his money on him at all times, and even needed to watch his food to keep them from pilfering it when he wasn't paying attention. When he returned on this particular evening, he immediately noticed that there was an extra person in the broken down temple. A man in a grayish white robe was sitting there. The first thing Chung Gong did was frown involuntarily. The temple wasn't roomy to begin with. Adding another person was like snatching away another piece of his territory. Then he noticed that the other man was holding a paper packet in his hand and slowly eating from it, bite by bite, with his head lowered. The aroma fanned out from the paper packet. It was the aroma of a donkey meat sandwich. He recognized the smell immediately. Chung Gong had eaten one a couple of times when his father was still alive. But after his father's death, his stepmother had teamed up with her own children and chased him out of the house. He earned so few coppers from hauling rice every day that he yearned to break them into more coins to use. Where would the chance to taste a donkey meat sandwich even come from? The aroma stirred up his long forgotten memories. Chun Gong couldn't help but gulp down a mouthful of saliva. With a second look, he noticed that next to the man was another bulging paper packet. That meant that there was another donkey meat sandwich. It wasn't only Chung Gong who'd noticed. The other two beggars had too, and one of them was already yelling, "Hey, if you want to stay here, you gotta ask us first. This temple is small and it can't hold that many people. Hurry up and get out of here." Chung Gong knew that they were deliberately picking a fight. He made no sound, just walked up to the spot where he usually stayed and sat down, gathering some straw. He kept his ears pricked, and he kept that donkey meat sandwich fixed in his sight, out of the corner of his eye. "I have nowhere else to go," said the gray-robed man in a gentle voice. "I saw that there was still room here, so I wanted to come in and rest for a while. If this brother is willing to accommodate me, then I will be deeply grateful." The beggar said, "If you want to stay and rest, fine by me. Just hand over everything you've got on you." Chung Gong sneered with mild disdain. "I don't want your things. As long as you pay me with food, I'm willing to fend off those two for you." The beggar said angrily, "Chun Da Lang, we weren't even talking to you, so why are you running your mouth?" Chung Gong was only 16, not very old at all. He wasn't tall or strong, but his youth lent him flexibility and great endurance, and he was ruthless to the bone. If it wasn't for that, he wouldn't have been able to lay stake to the largest patch of territory when he'd moved into the temple after the beggars. "What, so you're allowed to talk but not me?" Chung Gong said lazily. They were beggars, yes, but in this town, all the beggars banded together and shared information. Since there were two of them, they figured they needn't be afraid of Chung Gong. The beggar didn't pay Chung Gong any further heed. Instead, he got up and grabbed for the donkey meat sandwich from next to the man in gray. "Cut the crap. Hand over everything you've got. You want to enter these here temple gates? Well, I'm your Grandpa Lai, and I call the shots." But before his hand could touch the food, someone grabbed his wrist. The beggar was furious. "Chun Da Long, why don't you mind your own business? You even got an issue with me eating something?" With his other hand, Chung Gong snatched up the donkey meat sandwich. "I want to eat too. Why didn't you ask me?" As he spoke, he unwrapped the packet and took a bite. "I've already had some. You want the rest?" he asked gleefully. The beggar threw himself at Chung Gong, trying to hit him. Chung Gong quickly stuffed the packet into his lapel. Then the two of them fell into a heap, brawling. The other beggar, who'd stood off to the side, joined in as well, and the fight grew from 2 people to 3. Compared to the other two, Chun Gong wasn't as strong, nor was he as tall. But the secret to his victories was that he fought without any regard for his own life. He was unflinchingly vicious. After kicking one of the beggars hard in the stomach, Chen Gong dusted off his hands. With his hands on his hip, he spat, I put up with you guys for long enough. You were always messing with me just because you were here first. You even spat in my food in secret when I first got here. Don't think I didn't see. You still want to fight? Bring it on. I've got nothing anyway. I've got nothing to lose but my life. If you've got the guts, then bring it. It was exactly this viciousness of his that terrified the beggar. Hearing Chen Gong's challenge, he looked down at his partner, who still lay flat on the ground, unable to get up. He chickened out immediately, clutching at his middle, and turned and ran. When his partner saw him go, he didn't dare keep fighting either. He crawled to his feet, still holding his stomach and making noises of pain, then snarled, Just you wait, you little brat. With those last words, he hobbled out of the temple. Chen Gong fished the half-eaten donkey meat sandwich out from his lapel and took another bite. Satisfied, he said, Not bad. Did you buy it from the Lee family in the south of town? The meat is chewy, and it's still hot. It's going to burn my throat. He felt like the brawl was worth it, just for this bite of donkey meat. He'd been thinking those two were eyesores for a while now anyway, and after seizing the opportunity, he'd have the place all to himself in the future. That was great. When the man in gray made no reply, he added, Hey, I'm asking you a question. What, you mute? The other man looked up. You chased them off. Aren't you afraid they'll come back for revenge? Only then did Chen Gong realize that something seemed wrong with the man's eyes. His gaze was dull, and even though he was looking in Chen Gong's direction, he didn't seem to be looking at him. Once Chen Gong took in the bamboo cane at the man's side, he understood. This wasn't a mute, but a blind man. He clicked his tongue in disdain. Afraid? I've never been afraid. What can those losers do? Chen Gong looked at the man in gray up and down. He was dressed in coarse clothes from head to toe, and neither the style nor material was anything special. The only noteworthy thing was his face. Bluntly speaking, he didn't look much like another homeless person like Chen Gong, but more like a wandering scholar. What's your name? Chen Gong asked. You don't look like someone who's in trouble. What are you doing in a place like this? Even rats don't want to nest here. The man in gray nodded in his direction and smiled. My name is Shun Qiao. I fell ill and was without any money. This was the only place I could find to stay for a few days. Once I've earned a little money for the journey, I'll return home. Thank you for helping me drive away the other two. How should I address you? There had been both truth and lies in Yu Shengyan's words, so he wasn't completely trustworthy. But in the end, Shun Qiao had no place to go other than Xuandu Mountain. After giving it some thought, he finally decided to head there first. Xuandu Mountain was located on the border between northern Zhou and southern Chen. There were two ways to get there. The first was to travel southwards all the way from Funing County until one crossed into Chen, and then bear northeast, which was a rather indirect route. The other way was to head directly south from this place, which was a comparatively shorter journey and somewhat more convenient. Shen Qiao chose the latter way. Even though the world around it was in chaos, Funing County had been spared from disaster and was still peaceful and prosperous, a single piece of pure land in the turbulent world. And what Shen Qiao said was true. He was penniless, and this was the best place to rectify that situation. His eyesight was recovering very slowly, but he definitely made some progress. In the daytime, with enough light, he could see some vague and blurry outlines. This was much better than when he'd just woken up and couldn't even see his hand when he held it before his face. Chen Gong sat down. Anything's fine. My name is Chen Gong, so you can just call me Chen Dalang. I ate one of your donkey meat sandwiches earlier, so let's say that's your rent for today. But I also helped you chase off those two guys. When we add that on to the cost of tomorrow's stay, you're going to have to pay me 3 donkey meat sandwiches tomorrow. Shen Xiao smiled. Very well. When he saw him agree so readily, Chen Gong became suspicious. What are you going to buy donkey meat sandwiches with? Didn't you say you had no money? Then I'll simply earn more. You? I've heard of scholars being bookkeepers and accountants, but you can't even see, Chen Gong said, full of ridicule. How can you do bookkeeping? Don't tell me you're going to haul rice too. I'm telling you, 3 donkey meat sandwiches, not one less. Don't think you can weasel out of it. You can ask around about me. I, Chen Da Lang, might have nothing else, but even ghouls are scared of fighting me. Didn't you see those 2 losers just now? If you can't bring me 3 sandwiches tomorrow, you can sleep outside and eat air for dinner. Shen Qiao was good-natured. He didn't get angry when Chen Gong used such a tone with him. He even smiled and agreed. Although the ramshackle temple was very broken down, leaking from all sides and without even an undamaged window, its redeeming feature was that there were many pillars supporting the altars, which could be used to shelter from the wind. Chen Gong had also brought in some straw, stacks, and firewood. He used the straw as a blanket to keep out the draft and burned the wood for warmth. Of course, these had only been for himself, but now that Shen Qiao was willing to bring offerings to the temple, Chen Gong reluctantly shared some straw and wood with him. Then he saw that Shen Qiao was actually well prepared. Inside his bag was a thick, old garment that he used as a blanket. At this, Chen Gong couldn't help but give a cold snort. The 2 beggars didn't return. They'd probably found some new shelter. Chen Gong brazenly claimed the clothes they'd used as blankets for himself, but when he caught a whiff of the sour odor on them, he curled his lips and threw them away, then moved himself closer to the fire. His original plan was to snatch Shen Xiao's garment for himself as well, but on second thought, he could just wait to strike until the other man ran out of offerings. With this thought in mind, he inadvertently fell right to sleep. Early the next morning, Chen Gong got up and prepared to go to work at the granary as usual. He looked around. Shen Xiao had vanished, leaving only a pile of straw that still held his imprint and a heap of dark ash, what was left of his firewood. Chen Gong didn't think much of it and headed off to the granary. He didn't believe for a moment that Shen Qiao would really return with 3 sandwiches that day. After all, if the guy had any money to spare, he wouldn't need to stay in a broken-down temple that even ghosts steered clear of. Not to mention that he was both feeble and blind. So what was he going to do to earn money? Don't you dare return empty-handed. I'll beat you up so badly even your mother won't recognize you. That evening, Chen Gong walked towards the broken-down temple, all while silently mulling this over. Before he'd even stepped through the door, he smelled a familiar aroma. The sound of his footsteps seemed to draw Shen Qiao's attention. The man raised his head and smiled in Chen Gong's direction. You've returned. Donkey meat! Chen Gong only got out those 2 words, a stern look on his face, when he stopped short. For then he saw 3 paper packets stuffed with donkey meat sandwiches neatly placed upon the straw where he slept. All right, everyone, that concludes today's reading of chapters 4, 5, and 6 of Thousand Autumns by Meng Xi Shi. I hope you enjoyed this chapter, and I look forward to seeing you all next time. Bye-bye.